Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today. From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. Welcome to Coast AM. Great program for you in store tonight. Why was the Great Pyramid of Giza built? In a moment, Scott Crichton joins us live from the United Kingdom. His latest work is The Great Pyramid Void Enigma. He'll tell us his thoughts on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie back with you. Scott Crichton with us as we go live to the United Kingdom. His latest work is called The Great Pyramid Void Enigma. Scott is a communication network engineer with a lifelong passion for ancient Egypt. For almost 2 decades, he has immersed himself into intense research in an attempt to make sense of the many mysteries of the most famous civilization there, ancient civilization. His many articles, books, radio, and television appearances have brought an entirely new perspective and understanding of our ancient past and simultaneously presented orthodox Egyptology with some considerable challenges to its own narrative. Scott, welcome back to the program. How are you?
I'm very well, George. Nice to be back on Coast to Coast. It's been a while.
It's been a while, but it's always good to have you on the show. Your work is just fantastic. How did you get interested in Egypt?
Well, I think probably just like most people, George, I'm just fascinated by history. I think from when I was a young child, really. Just wondering how did we get to where we are, But as you get older and begin to question, our origins, Egypt is the natural place really to start because, let's face it, it's the oldest civilization that we know about. So, it gives us the oldest writings in the world, the ancient Egyptian pyramid texts. So, in my opinion, Egypt is the key to understanding how we got to where we are.
And let me ask you this, Scott. The Great Pyramid at Giza has been considered to be many things: a pharaoh's tomb, a power plant, a water pump, to name a few. But you have your own thoughts on why you think it was built. And we'll get into the possibilities of how it was built later. But why do you think the Great Pyramid was built? Okay.
Egyptologists are partly right. They've got a bit of the story correct, but as I just said there, they've missed a big piece of the puzzle here. Now, the term I generally use for the pyramids, particularly when I'm talking about them, George, I'm talking about the first giant pyramids that were built, the first 16 pyramids between the 3rd and 4th dynasty. They stopped building pyramids for quite a long time after that. So I'm talking about the earliest pyramids, the giant pyramids. Now, the term I generally use for these structures is recovery vaults, or simply ark, because that's what I believe they were. Now, some of the earliest writings, in fact, that we have from antiquity, including Origen's homilies and even, I think, the Dead Sea Scrolls, tells us that the pyramid in ancient times was considered as an ark. And we also actually observe that particular theme in the paintings of sort of Renaissance artists like Lorenzo Ghiberti and some others. But I think it's only fair to say also here that this particular function of the first pyramids as arks or recovery vaults actually comes to us from the Coptic Egyptians themselves. From one of their legends that have been passed down from ancient times, the legend of Saurid, which tells us that the pyramids were conceived originally and principally as a system for the rebirth, not of the king, but of the kingdom. They were built, according to this legend, as a defence against a coming deluge that would drown the entire kingdom. And into these giant pyramids, and also around the periphery of the pyramids, everything would be stored to secure the kingdom's rebirth or regeneration after this deluge had finally subsided.
Almost like a seed bank or something like that, Scott, huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was actually going to touch on that, George, because in 2008, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which is located within the Arctic Circle, was officially opened. Okay, now there's a big difference here because the Svalbard Vault is built into the side of a mountain, which, in my opinion, is a bit short-sighted because if there were a global cataclysm and Svalbard suffered massive earthquakes, it's unlikely that anybody would actually be able to find the location of it because its highly visible entrance would likely be buried under tons of muck and rock from landslides. But the ancient Egyptians, they seem to have thought it through way better than we have. They built, artificial mountains that would stand out in the environment, in the natural environment, like beacons, like giant cairns pointing to where the survivors could find the recovery items that were, according to the legend of Saud, stored within these monuments. But in saying that, there's one thing that was stored within the Great Pyramid, and only the Great Pyramid, that was essentially made the Great Pyramid the engine room of this whole pyramid building project of these 16 pyramids. They didn't just build one pyramid. The entire 16 pyramids of the 3rd and 4th dynasty, it was a pan-generational project because this legend of Saurid, he was told that the deluge would arise in 300 years in the future because his astronomer priests, they saw something in the sky, the night sky, that the stars had changed their courses across the heavens. And Saurid asked his astronomers, what does this mean? And they told him, well, in 300 years there'll be a deluge that will drown the entire country. And Saurid's response was, well, we are going to build pyramids, man-made mountains, and into these man-made mountains we are going to store everything that the kingdom will need to reconstitute itself, to reboot itself, to be reborn again after the floodwaters had subsided.
Now, was this the flood of Noah or something else?
Well, I don't actually think it was the flood of Noah, George. And I say that because there's a scholar, a Hungarian scholar by the name of Sándor Fodor, or Alexander Fodor, and he studied this Saurid legend in depth, this Coptic Egyptian legend that's been passed down from antiquity and kept alive by the Coptic Egyptian people. He studied this legend in great depth, and his conclusion was that the flood of Noah, the biblical flood, is a different flood. He says that the flood of the Saurid legend seems more connected with the ancient Egyptian people, and it's been ascribed to a particular point in ancient Egyptian history. What he's basically saying, it's less myth than perhaps the flood of Noah.
Scott, in your book, you talk about the possibility of an ancient pole shift event, which could have created this entire mess. Tell me about that.
Where to begin? Well, it goes back again, George, to this legend of Saurid. That's basically what his astronomer priests saw. The stars had changed, or were changing their course across the heavens. Now, it's not the stars that change their course. It's the earth below it that's changing its course. In other words, probably what they were witnessing was a pole shift event happening. Now, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. I mean, you find the anecdotal evidence for this virtually everywhere. We have countless ancient texts that tell us that the Earth was once upside down. The Egyptians tell us in at least 4 different texts that the sun rose in the west and set in the east. That's indicative that the Earth was once upturned. Plato tells us the same things. Cultures from all over the world, from South America, China, Greenland, and on and on and on, tell us the same thing. In antiquity, the world was upside down. Evidence for this, as I said, well, it's mostly anecdotal, but some things like I don't know if you recall, George, the Robert Bauval Orion correlation theory.
Yes.
When he had this argument with Dr. Ed Krupp of the Griffith Observatory, who claimed that Bauval's view of the Orion belt stars with the Giza pyramids, there was a correlation between them, but Dr. Krupp said for it to be correct, either the Earth would need to be turned upside down or the stars would need to be turned upside down. And it was an argument that went on for, I don't know, about 2 decades and probably still going on. But, Bauval can make an artistic impression of a match by looking south, which is what he claims. But when you consider the correlation from a strict astronomical perspective, that the Giza pyramids are reflecting an upside-down world, where Orion's belt would then be observed in the northern sky of the southern hemisphere, then the correlation of that is really quite striking. And Dr. Ed Krupp, from a strictly astronomical perspective, is actually right. Although Bauval is also right, you can have an artistic sort of impression by looking at it due south. Now, I don't think that Dr. Krupp was ever arguing that the Earth was once upside down. I'm not saying that. But he may just have hit the nail on the head without actually realising it when he actually said that. So we have that from Dr. Krupp. When you look at the Sphinx, George, between its paws there is the Sphinx, or what's called the Dream Stela. It's a granite slab, a stone granite slab which stands between the paws, and it's got hieroglyphics engraved onto it. Now, at the very top, there you see 2 sphinxes, and they're facing opposite directions, 180 degrees opposite directions. Now, a lot of theorists think that was because there must be a second sphinx somewhere out in the western desert, but that's never been found. Well, actually, if you look more closely at these 2 back-to-back sphinxes, what you see just above at the head of the sphinx is a hieroglyphic sign for sunrise, and it's on both sides. So basically what we're looking at is the Sphinx once looked at the sunrise in this direction, but it also looked at the sunrise in the opposite direction, 180 degrees, because that sunrise hieroglyphic sign is in both sides at the head of both of these sphinxes, 180 degrees, apart. So again, it's anecdotal, but that is suggestive that, as these ancient texts, Egyptian texts tell us, the sun once rose in the west and set in the east. We also have, the tomb of Senenmut. He was the architect of Queen Hatshepsut of the 18th dynasty, about 1500 BC or thereabouts. Now, what we see in this tomb, it has this astronomical ceiling, George, and when you look at this ceiling, it shows that the Orion constellation is east of the star Sirius.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It shows that Orion is lower than Sirius, and it shows that both Orion and Sirius are above the ecliptic. Now, George, that can only be observed from the southern hemisphere, because in the northern hemisphere, if you look south, Orion, now if you look at it tonight, this evening, Orion will be to the right or to the west of Sirius. Orion will be higher than Sirius, and Sirius and Orion are both below the line of the ecliptic, the imaginary line of the ecliptic, which the sun and the moon and all the planets follow across the sky. So it's the complete opposite on this ceiling of the Tomb of Senemet. So that again is indicative that once upon a time in our ancient past, we were looking at a different sky, an upside down sky to what we have today. There's other anecdotal evidence, like the shafts, the small shafts within the Great Pyramid. There's 4 of these shafts. 2 of them are directed to the southern sky, and the other 2 are directed to the northern sky. Now, Egyptologists have their own idea what these shafts are for.
Right.
But when you look at them closely, George, you'll see that the trajectories, if you follow the trajectories of these shafts up into the sky, you see that the northern shafts, the trajectories cross over each other, but that doesn't happen with the southern shafts. They don't cross over. And that, again, is a sign that the belt stars which these shafts target moved across the sky and flipped over. That's what the crossing over of the shafts, of the trajectories of these shafts demonstrates, that the stars themselves flipped over or crossed over. That's what these shafts are showing us. So again, it's anecdotal evidence, but very compelling. You have, the dating of Dr. Virginia Trimble. I think back in the 1960s, she was able to date the Great Pyramid by using one of the shafts, the lower shaft, which targeted the centre of Orion's belt, which she dated to around 2500 BC. She used the shaft to do that. Then Robert Bauval came along in the 1980s, 1990s, and he dated the monuments using a different method, the alignment of the 3 pyramids, that angle of the alignment of the 3 pyramids, and he looked to see when that same angle was or appeared in the belt stars. He used astronomical software to wind back the heavens to find when that angle matched the angle of the pyramids on the ground.
And they matched perfectly, didn't they?
Yeah, but the date, George, the date was 10,500 BC. It's now updated that to 11,000 BC. But the point is, Virginia Trimble said 2,500 BC. Bauval says 10,500 BC. That 8,000-year gap should not exist.
Exactly. And I tend to believe Bauval's computations before anybody else. What do you think?
Bauval, I think, is absolutely on the money, George. I really do believe he's on the money. And I say that because I've investigated really, really thoroughly. And if you look at some of my other books, you'll see why I believe the Orion correlation is absolutely spot on. One of the main reasons I do believe that, George, is because there are 2 sets of other, or 2 triads of other smaller pyramids at Giza. There's 3 small pyramids to the south of the 3rd pyramid at Giza. That's the smallest of the 3 giant ones. There's 3 small what they call Queen's pyramids to the south there, and to the east of the Great Pyramid, there's another 3 small pyramids there, which they also call Queen's pyramids. These are actually what I call precession markers, because what they're actually doing, if you look at Orion's belt over 26,000 years, it has 2 significant points, like noon in our 24-hour clock and midnight in our 24-hour clock. They're 2 key points, and that's what those 2 sets of Queen's pyramids are doing, George. They're marking 12 noon and 12 midnight, and they do it for a very specific reason. And, you can actually see the alignment happening. When you look at Orion's belt from, say, 10,500 BC, they're aligned perfectly horizontally south, and then over 13,000 years, they go across the sky and they rotate 90 degrees to the eastern horizon, and that's where we have the other three pyramids on the eastern horizon rotated 90 degrees. It's perfect. Now, Beval never explained that. He touched on it, but he didn't go into any depth of it. He didn't make that connection between the two sets of Queen's pyramids showing the full processional cycle of Orion's belt. It's absolutely magnificent what the ancient Egyptians have done at Giza, and it could not be clearer. It's Orion, absolutely, no doubt in my mind. And there's other reasons which I give in my books for believing that they are depicting Orion on the ground. And one of the main reason they're doing it, George, is because I touched on earlier at the top of the show that this is a cycle. Now, if they want to tell us when it's going to happen again, you need a clock, not just a 24-hour clock. You need a stellar clock that marks time by thousands of years, not minutes or hours, but thousands of years. And that's what this stellar clock, processional clock at Giza is doing. And it's absolutely amazing how it works.
Well, let's hope it's thousands of years. And Scott, let me ask you this. The fact that those pyramids were constructed either tells me they had incredible technology then, the Egyptians, or they had some help from a higher civilization. It's got to be one or the other.
Oh, that's a toughie. Okay, my view on this question, George, is, and I probably take a different view on this topic.
Okay.
Than most other people. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the Drake equation.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah. It's set from the SETI Institute, where he claims there's a certain percentage of civilizations that are out there in the universe.
That's right, absolutely. That's
Frank Drake.
Yeah, Frank Drake, that's it. Yeah. Now, and it basically, as you just said, it postulates that there must be, the universe must be teeming with intelligent life. But there's also the rare earth equation, and that takes the opposite view, that the probability of complex intelligent life evolving on a planet is exceedingly rare. That's the rare earth equation. And that the universe its view is that the universe is too young for an intelligent species to have been able to master interstellar travel. So who's right?
Well, you look at the universe, it's about 14 billion years old. We're about 4.5 billion years old at where we are. So let's assume there's a civilization that started 12 billion years ago. I mean, who knows what kind of technology they might have had if they're still around.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, if they're still around, because there's also this view that civilization will become so advanced that they can't survive the technological advance. They just end up destroying themselves by nuclear war or whatever. But the point I was making, George, is my view is that I look at those equations and I think I come to the view of the rare earth equation. I think that probably more my thinking, because what I see around the world and is these parts, these out of place artifacts that we find, like the London Hammer, which was found in a seam of rock, is supposedly 150 million years old. We're finding chains that have been embedded in coal, have been pulled out of seams of coal, and all this kind of thing. My view, George, is that there is advanced life, but it's here on Earth. It's not come from outside Earth. It's always been here.
And you can't rule that out either. That's a distinct possibility, which means then that the Egyptians were way advanced and had technology maybe beyond what we have today.
Well, it's possible because, we see, the U.S. Department of Defense are now chasing these things in the sky. We've got the videos on YouTube. We're watching, these fighter pilots chasing these things all over the sky.
They can't catch them. That's right.
Yeah, So my view is that that isn't an alien species. They're here on Earth. They evolved here on Earth. You know, these chains and London hammers that we're finding at 150 million years old, that was them at their early start on Earth.
Well, if they're Earthlings, where might they be today? Think about that, Scott. Scott, so you brought up an interesting possibility that the high civilization could be coming from planet Earth, could be here now. If that's the case, and that's a probability, where might they be living or hiding?
Right. I suspect probably under the Earth's oceans is a likely possibility. We hear of these USOs, unidentified
submersibles.
Submersible objects. You know, so there may be civilization somewhere under our seas. There's the story of what's his name, Admiral Richard Byrd, was it, who flew over the Antarctica. When he got to the centre of Antarctica, he apparently met with this ancient civilization that apparently lived in within the Earth. There's apparently, he said, there's some hole in the
center of the Earth. Yeah.
Yeah, that this civilization lived in, and he met with them, and he reported this in his notes. I mean, he was a military guy, George, and he reported this in his military notes, what happened, and the U.S. Defense Department basically told him not to speak a word of it to anyone. So, but his diary was eventually published, and this became known. So, we find that in things like the Bible as well, where we hear about the Watchers and the Nephilim, angels. Noah was told by some god or Nephilim to create an ark because this higher being knew that the earth was about to be destroyed in a flood, but told Noah to build this ark. So this may have been a civilization that's right here on Earth that knows our Earth and our moon and our solar system far better than we know it. They've been here for an advanced civilization here on Earth for millions of years, but they've basically taken the Star Trek oath of the prime directive of not interfering with humanity. They may actually have created humanity by, I don't know. I mean, I'm just hypothesizing.
Oh, that's good though. No, that's good.
Fact, but they could have created us just like the Bible says. So who knows? But I just get this feeling. I don't know where I get this feeling from, but I just see all these parts around the world, and I'm basically just connecting it all to this civilization that was their development.
Mm-hmm. But regardless of the civilization, Scott, you're convinced, as I am, that the pyramids were built with higher technology, right?
When you go to Giza and you look at what they did, the rest of the world was barely out of the Stone Age, and here is this civilization in Egypt, and I don't think it was 4,500 years ago, George. I think it's much, much longer.
Yeah, let's say it's 10,500 years ago. I mean, can you imagine the Stone Age that they were in? How could they construct these blocks and then also move them to get them up to where they are to form the pyramids?
It's just breathtaking. It's just breathtaking. It really, really is a marvel. And it really does pose these kind of questions. You see Egyptologists trying to explain, these blocks that they cut, these statues of these incredibly, symmetrical statues, these giant, enormous statues, perfectly symmetrical in basalt and granite, two of the hardest stones we have on Earth, and they could do this with apparent ease because, they find these statues all over the place. To me, George, that is just mind-boggling, and it really does need a better answer than what, oh, well, they had lots of time to rub it with, sand, and a round stone ball, I'm like, oh, come on.
But your title of your book, The Great Pyramid Void Enigma, tell me what the Great Pyramid Void is.
Right, okay, this is, the void is a space inside the Great Pyramid. It was discovered by scientists, a group of 30 scientists in 2017. They detected it using muography or muons, and it's basic byproducts, of or stellar dust that's come through the Earth's atmosphere, particles, cosmic rays that's come through the Earth's atmosphere, and they detected this massive space. Now, this space, George, is about the same size as the Grand Gallery. Now, it's massive. The Grand Gallery is 150 feet long. It's about 10 feet wide, 30 feet high. And this big void that they've discovered inside it is about the same dimensions. And they didn't know it was there. There's no passages to it. There's no corridors or anything. It just sits up there, and nobody knows why it's there. Although, if you look at the rest of the architecture and what the ancient Egyptian Saurid legend tells us, it tells us why it's there. That legend, which gets dismissed by Egyptologists as pure legend, tells us why that big void is inside the Great Pyramid. And it makes perfect sense because it was the engine room of this whole recovery system, and without that big void and what they put in that big void, the whole thing, it just couldn't happen. The rebirth of the kingdom could not happen without this big void.
Let's take some calls here for you. First-time caller Brad in Tennessee. Brad, you're on with us. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, good morning, George and Scott.
Morning.
My question is there any correlation or connections with the pyramids in Giza to the pyramids in Central and South America?
Any correlation there, Scott?
Well, it's funny because you find this strange, like at Teotihuacan, down the Avenue of the Dead, you've got the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl. And they bear the same Orion layout as the pyramids at Giza.
That's amazing.
It's quite remarkable, that that they do this. And some of the South American legends equate to or are similar to the myth of Isis and Osiris. So yeah, there's definitely. I mean, you just look at on to Google and have a look. You'll see the Avenue of the Dead, the Pyramid, Sun, Moon, and Quetzalcoatl. Compare it with the lineup of the Giza pyramids, and they're not identical, but they're very, very similar, and a similar layout to Orion's belt. So, yeah.
What does that tell you, Scott? If the similarities are there and it's so close, what does that tell you about the construction of the pyramids again?
Well, what it tells me is that Orion constellation was obviously important to the cultures that were behind this, Orion correlation. It may be a progenitor culture that influenced both. That was a seafaring culture. We're talking about 20,000 years ago and before that. Inspired this Osiris Orion correlation. And as I say, the pyramids at Giza use Orion correlation, or the Orion constellation, for a very specific reason, to create a precession clock that marks a very specific date in our future. I haven't looked in detail as to whether the pyramids in South America do a similar thing, but that might be something we might look at in the future.
Scott, you write about Colonel Richard Howard Vesey. Tell me about him.
Oh, that Colonel Richard William Howard Vyse. Now, he was a British colonel. He was in the British Army, and he went to Giza in late 1836. And in 1837, he was working with a chap called Giovanni Belzoni. Belzoni, when Weiss was inside exploring the pyramid, Belzoni told Howard Weiss that he suspected there may be chambers above the King's Chamber. The King's Chamber was known about, obviously, but
Sure.
Belzoni suspected there may be chambers above it, which nobody knew about. Weiss sacked him, manufactured an excuse to have him kicked off the site, and he wasn't allowed to come back. And then Weiss went on to blast his way using gunpowder through this granite masonry deep inside the Great Pyramid above the King's Chamber, and he found 4 small chambers above, just as Bolzoni had suspected. Weiss went on to discover these 4 chambers. Now, what Weiss tells us when he went into these chambers is that he discovered the name of Khufu painted onto the wall in rough graffiti, red ochre paint. These aren't, perfect hieroglyphics, they're just rough graffiti, but it's Khufu's name. And he declared to the world that this proved that the Great Pyramid was indeed constructed by Khufu. It was the link that Egyptology, it was almost like the Holy Grail for Egyptology, final proof that the Great Pyramid was, in fact, constructed by Khufu. Because although Herodotus had made the claim 2,000 years previously, nobody had any actual proof that it was the case until Colonel Richard William Howard Weiss found, apparently, allegedly, these marks. It comes from Colonel Weiss's handwritten diary, which I managed to find, his field notes. Now, he's not going to publish this in his actual book. He published 3 volumes, yeah? He's not going to put this in his actual book, but it's there in his diary. It's there in his field notes, which anyone can go and see. They're in a small archive centre in Aylesbury, just outside the north of London. Now, what he writes in this page of his book is this: for Raven and Hill. Raven and Hill were his 2 assistants, okay? For Raven and Hill, these were the marks from the cartouche to be inscribed upon a low trussing. That's what he writes. To be inscribed, not that I found inscribed, but to be inscribed upon a low trussing. Now, there's only one area inside the Great Pyramid that has trussings, and that's Campbell's Chamber that Weiss discovered. The gabled blocks go at an angle. So that's the trussing, and this Khufu cartouche is at the low end of this trussing. He says the low end of any trussing. That's what he says. This cartouche is to be inscribed by Raven and Hill on the low end of any trussing, and that's where we find it, George. So I'm absolutely convinced. That's just one piece of evidence. There's a ton of evidence that, just daft things that they got wrong. Like they were writing numbers, hieroglyphic numbers, back to front. They wrote them back to front, George.
Yeah, it's great. Well, now, what's the motivation?
Well, that's kind of a difficult one. But I think there's possibly a few motivations that were in play, George. One of the things is, Weiss wasn't actually discovering anything major. He discovered these chambers, but that's not what interested Weiss at the time. What interested him was treasure.
Treasure,
gold.
money, that's right.
Yeah, the king's sarcophagus, that's what he wanted to find. He didn't want to find empty chambers, and that's all he was finding. There was nothing in any of these 4 chambers that he discovered, and he spent something like $1.2 or $1.3 million in today's terms in his explorations. He's a wealthy, wealthy man, but he was finding nothing. And he wanted, in his published book, he keeps telling us again and again and again, I wanted to make an important discovery. It was like almost he was becoming desperate to make an important discovery. And finding nothing, well, what's the next best thing he could discover? And that's the king's name, which categorically places the Great Pyramid within the providence of the creation, because Weiss, this is possibly another motive. Weiss is a fairly religious man and believed in the truth of the Bible and, the word of the Bible, and, that the earth was only, created in 4000 BC according to Bishop Ussher's chronology. And he wanted to make sure, I suspect, that the Great Pyramid, by placing Khufu, a known king, onto these walls, that would then place the pyramid within the provenance of God's creation. And something similar happened with Champollion when he first began cracking hieroglyphics. He was financed by the Roman Catholic Church to go to Egypt to do further research. But the Catholic Church only, it was conditional, the funding was conditional, that Champollion kept silent any discovery, any text he discovered that contradicted biblical teaching. And so that was the deal. And I think a similar thing probably might have been going on with Weiss. He wanted to make sure that the pyramid was within the provenance of God's creation, so he made sure that there was a cartouche of a known king on the walls. But as I said, there's all these other marks that apparently, they were in, two guys were in one of these chambers, a chamber called Lady Arbuthnot's, and they were looking at the walls. They described the walls in this chamber. The first time they went in, the two of them, now remember, they'd already opened two chambers below, and they claimed to have found marks, these hieroglyphic painted marks in those chambers as well. In this chamber, Lady Arbuthnot's, which they didn't find anything until 4 days later, they suddenly claimed they found all these painted marks. Now, the other two chambers, they found them instantly, but in this particular chamber, it took them 4 days to find these marks, apparently. And this chamber has more marks, more of these hieroglyphic marks, more cartouches than any of the other chambers combined. Than all of the other chambers combined, this chamber has more of these markings, and they never found one of them the first day, when they first entered. It describes what they were doing. They were looking at the walls, they were looking around, they were taking measurements. Two guys never found a single mark until 4 days later it gets reported. And then we found marks in these chambers on the walls. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous that you could expect anyone to believe that story. It's just utterly ridiculous.
That's crazy times, Scott. But you've done some great work with your books on the pyramids.
Right.
It's all magical, Scott. It's all magical. The name of the book, The Great Pyramid Void Enigma. Scott, thank you for being on the program again. Do get back to us when your book on ETs or The Journey to the Center of the Earth is complete. The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.